Hi, my name is Pete Lupo. I'm a residential real estate lawyer, but I also specialize in 5G telecommunications, specifically telecommunications law in general, not just 5G, but everything that deals with macro sites as well as small cell sites. So we'll go into a discussion with that a little later. So just to give you a little bit a difference, a little bit of a primer, to give you some of the technical specifications between macro and small cell sites. So I'll talk about macro cell sites first. So typically, output's roughly 200 to 2,000 watts. The range for these could be from half a mile up to 10 miles. Conventionally, they look like towers, usually 150 to 200 foot high towers, usually monopoles. They're also put on rooftops, traditionally in suburban and definitely in urban areas. In fact, in urban areas of New York City, they're almost exclusively deployed on rooftops. So it's part of our landscape. It's been part of our landscape since the 1990s. So what they usually use for is 4G, LTE, and sub-6 5G, which I'll describe a little bit later on. Normally about three sectors, alpha, beta, and gamma sectors, but they could be a fourth sector as well. But historically, three sectors. And they could be anywhere from 9 to 12 antennas, perhaps more, and per carrier. So you see that on a typical monopole that they're separated by 10 vertical feet on top of the tower. And that purpose is to make sure that there's some degree of vertical separation, and that's to prevent, I should say, signal interference. On the bottom, usually on the ground, you'll see equipment platform that have the cabinets. Those cabinets contain the radios, and the radios are the ones that transmit and receive the signal. You'll see power and telco. Power is the obvious, it's electric. The telco is usually the wire that runs from there to the network, and it's often trenched under the ground. A little secret about wireless carriers, and something that people don't know, is that wireless isn't truly wireless. So it's true that your handset that you typically use, your smartphone, is equipped with transmitters and receivers. That's effectively what it is. It's a radio, transmits and receives signals, and it communicates with these towers, these macro cell sites, and they have antennas to them. And your phone communicates with that. But what really truly creates a network is really hard lines, old fashioned copper in many cases, or fiber optic. And that creates a network so that you communicate with the antenna. It then transmits that to the next tower for wherever you're calling to. And then that transmits and receives to the phone or the handset that you're talking to. But most of it is, in fact, wired. Small cell sites give you a little bit of a contrast about how these look. So in principle, the same thing as a macro site in terms of what they do in terms of function, but you see there's a very big difference in its technical specifications, and that later on we'll discuss will drive the way these carriers are actually deploying it. The wattage is a lot less. You see, it's 5 to 50 watts, much a small fraction. So the amount of RF emissions is much less. The range is 300 to 1,500 feet. I generally like to tell people, as a rule of thumb, imagine a football and a half field size, one and a half football fields apart. That's basically the range of one small cell site, and it's how they separate in terms of measuring the next small cell tower to be installed. So you have a nice complete umbrella coverage. It's commonly used for 5G, and we'll talk about 5G. It's a millimeter wave technology, much smaller bandwidth than 4G, but they do use it for 4G technology, typically as infills. So areas that the macro site, the large tower doesn't cover, if there's a drop calls because either lack of coverage or too many calls and it overwhelms the network, they often put a small cell to do what they call infill or capacity to fill those needs for 4G sites. Right away site, typically going to be on top of utility pole, 38-foot high conventional wood utility poles, commonly used for electrical lines, cable lines, and the like. And there could be put on top of traffic light poles. Usually, they put a little extension on top of there. It might be on wrought iron poles, or there would be on concealment poles. And I'll talk a little more about concealment poles later on. Concealment poles are often in the industry referred to as stealth installations, but commonly also in layman's terms referred to as concealment poles. The antennas could be a number of configurations. It might be 1 to 3 antennas, much smaller antennas than the 4G sites, but three in total, covering three sectors. Sometimes they do what's called small antennas, whip antennas. They can be cylindrical in shape, and they're generally called omnidirectional. So it might be one cylinder on top of the utility pole, and they cover all the sectors, all what three antennas might cover. And that's usually deployed based on technology available for the carrier and some of the other technical requirements of the carrier themselves.